Okay, so here we are. Good morning. We have a bit of time today and tomorrow to look at the basic principles of Dzogchen, particularly the relation between refuge, what we rely on, and how that can both secure our territory and create lots of confusions. So we'll be looking both at our own condition as we ordinarily understand it, and what in Dzogchen is described as being the natural condition, that which is uncontrived, not artificial. So if we begin just with a little quiet sitting in order to arrive. Well, most of you are probably used to this. You take a simple focus. It could be an external mark on the floor in front of you, or the movement of the breath in and out. Allow your attention just to rest on that. And whenever you find your mind wandering off onto something else, you just very gently bring it back into that focus and settle into yourself. Okay. So, Buddhism is concerned with liberation, and we need to have a sense of what liberation means. Essentially, it means not being tied up in things which limit us, which condition us, which tie us in knots. How to untie these knots? If you have a knotted piece of string or a ball of wool that's all tangled up together, you have to find where the end is. And then you have to explore with that end how it goes into the mass and what the nature of the knots are. If you just pull it very hard, it won't work. You have to have a skillful attention and to be willing to keep looking again and again. In our culture, the will to power is very strong. The sense that if something's wrong, you should do something about it. And so the rapid mobilization of energy towards situations is very popular. Often we don't know what to do. The government has nationalized, in large part, many important banks like the Royal Bank of Scotland. Economists have very different ideas whether this will be useful or not useful. But what's important for governments is to be seen to be doing something, to be seen to be in charge of the situation. And when Gordon Brown did that, suddenly people think, oh, he's not a wally after all. He's a strong, powerful leader, just what we need in these troubled times. He may be leading us into a total nightmare, but anyway, he is our boss. This is very tempting for all of us, to mobilize energy to get on with something. But in order to find a real liberation, we have to find out what it is that we want to liberate ourselves from. Sometimes, maybe at work or in a relationship, it's very obvious what you have to liberate yourself from, which is the nonsense of the other person. If only you were different, I would be happy. Therefore, if I can help you to liberate yourself from your nonsense, then we'll all be happy. Locating the problem in the other is always very easy. But that's not really going to help us. Bob Marley says, free your mind from mental slavery. Now we have to find out what is mental slavery. What is it that we are enslaved to? In Buddhism, this is seen as the nature of attachment. That our sense of personal identity gets tied up with predictions and involvements and fusions with the things around us. We become fused with our body. We see this as our true home. Then as our body changes, we become upset because it's not what it was. We become fused with our occupation But in this economic climate, many people will lose their jobs, and so their sense of identity will be upset there. And so on. There are many, many things that we take for granted. We take them to be the case, although when we reflect on history, distant history, but also the history of our own lives, we find that they're not so reliable. And yet, the hope is always that this time it will be different. This time it will work out. This time I can truly stabilize something and find something reliable to cling to. Buddha explained that this kind of attachment is a source of great suffering, because it creates a concretized sense of self and a concretized sense of an external situation. There's something definite out there, and there's something definite in here, and if we get the two in the right kind of fit, then we'll lock into something that will keep us going for a long time. Very few situations are actually like that. Moment by moment, our thoughts, feelings, and sensations are changing, and moment by moment, the external circumstances are changing. We actually live in a completely dynamic situation. There is nothing solid and substantial that we can cling to. What we cling to are the abstractions of names and identifications, out of which we construct a sense, this is what it is today, and I can see this is how it was yesterday, and so it'll most likely be like that tomorrow. This is moving linguistic signifiers, moving words around to stabilize a fantasy of certainty and prediction. But what we actually find is that every situation is different. If you go home from here, you maybe check your answer phone, and there's messages. The messages weren't there when you left, and now the messages give you some new happy situation or some new sad situation. You didn't know that was going to be the case. You leave work on Friday, and you go in on Monday, and something's happened. So it's a whole new changed situation. What you thought you'd be doing that day is altered because of the circumstances. This is how we find ourselves. Children set off for school in the morning quite happy, and they come home in tears because somebody's bullied them or they didn't do well in an exam, and then you have to respond to that. Actually, most of us do not too bad in that way of dynamic responsiveness. But part of what holds us back is a sense, well, it shouldn't be like that. If only it was sorted, if only I just knew how things were going to be, then I could relax. But because they're never the way we think they're going to be, and they never fall in with our plans, there's always some agitation and anxiety. Padmasambhava, the great guru from Urgen who brought the tantric tradition and many aspects of Dzogchen into Tibet, he explained that ignorance, the root of attachment, arises when we forget to be present in the dynamic flow of experience, and we find ourselves standing apart and concretizing it. That is to say, we experience this is happening to me. I exist as somebody definite, and then an event which is out there and other than me is happening to me. This concretization, this reification or substantialization, turning moments in time, turning the flow of energy into concrete building blocks, then sets us the problem, how can I make the best possible life out of the building blocks I've got? It's like a child who gets some Lego set for Christmas, and they want to build something, but the bits of Lego they've got isn't enough to build the boat or the airplane they want. And then when they were happy with the first set, now they're unhappy because they look in the catalogue and think, that's the one I want to build, but my building blocks won't do that. And this is what we spend our life doing, trying to get rid of the old building blocks that don't work and get some new building blocks. That is to say, we construct our sense of self. We construct our life out of things. And in that process, we experience ourselves as a thing. And of course, the culture that we're living in treats us like things as well. Increasingly, if we move towards identity cards with CCTV, names and numbers go everywhere. We are fitted into a system of observation and objectification in which we are inspected all the time. And in some of my visits before here, we've talked a little bit about how that works, like in schools with Ofsted inspectors, with in hospitals, now with this tragedy in Haringey of a little baby being tortured to death. There'll be more rules and regulations for social workers. And the social workers will not be particularly supported by these rules and regulations, but they will embody the basic principle: something must be done and something must be seen to be done so that politicians can be protected from blame. This is the guiding factor. We have terrorists in this country, therefore we all have to be frightened and we all have to be anxious all the time in order to make the government feel that they're doing something. So you get hassled at the airport, people look at you as if you're a criminal because we can't trust anyone because we might be bad. This mood of suspicion feeds into the sense of isolation and self-doubt. Who am I? What am I doing? Maybe I'm a really bad person. Thoughts are endless. There is no end to thought. In Sanskrit, they talk of samsara, this world of endless rebirth. And what keeps this wheel of rebirth going is just the chain of thoughts. Since you were very, very small, you've had lots of thoughts. Thoughts come very easily. The breath goes in and out, and thoughts go whoof, 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 all day long. And one thought says, I'm lonely, I want a friend. So it gets another thought. But that thought now says, well, I'm lonely too, I want another one. And all day long, thoughts are weaving together patterns of significance. And our attachment to thoughts gives us a sense that we know what's going on. But then something happens, like the death of this poor child. And think, oh, we don't have enough thoughts. Let's get more systems installed. Let's get better ways of doing it. And if only we get a bigger infrastructure, more bureaucracy, more investigation, then we'll be able to take care of all possible eventualities. This is like Ronald Reagan's big kind of space reconnaissance that would look down on the world with nuclear weapons ready to blow up any enemy. Hollywood is full of movies like this, that somehow you can really detect where all the bad things are. The problem with this view is that the bad things are always outside. Margaret Thatcher, a blessed woman in many ways, had a wonderful proposition. She was determined to discover the enemy within. Now, she thought that the enemy within was Mr. Scargill. She wasn't looking closely enough. The enemy within was within her. Her own bigotry, her determination, her self-assurance. The enemy within is not outside, it's inside. We are our own worst enemy. The Buddha says very clearly in the Dhammapada, there is nobody who can help you more than yourself. There is nobody who can harm you more than yourself. Not your friends, not your enemies, not your parents, not your children. There is no one, even if they love you, even if they hate you, no one can harm you more than yourself. So liberation is not about a socio-political liberation. A good thing as that is, the more activity we make in the world to change things, the more we find we don't know what's going on. In some of the later Mahayana sutras, they use the image of Indra's net, which is described as being a net of jewels which pervades the vast infinity of space. And each jewel, which is held in place by little chains of other jewels, each jewel has so many facets and is so brilliant that it reflects all the other jewels in this fabulous net. So we are constantly interacting and reflecting aspects of each other. Because of that, the complexity of the situation is so great that you cannot catch it by cognitive processes. Ordinary thoughts which build up a picture piece by piece can't grasp it. You need the immediacy of an aesthetic appreciation which is completely open. And this is the function of meditation. To go beyond, or to free ourselves from reliance on the idea that you can build up knowledge like some vast computer database to a point where you have a kind of omniscience. Something will always be missing. And the very act of power, of trying to dominate and control the situation, simply increases the complexity we face. Very often the way out is just to give up the struggle, just to accept this is how it is. And as soon as you do that, things start to change. The very struggle with the situation means that you're putting your life energy, whatever you call that, libido, prana, chi, you're pumping your life into the situation so that it gets bigger and bigger and mushrooms out. And just by thinking softly, by accepting this is how it is, we start to get a bit of space. So what is it that we are attached to? We are attached to the outer forms of our country, our language, our history, the economic situation. We're attached to predictions about the future. We're also attached to the very building blocks of that. We're attached to thoughts per se as if they will tell the truth. That is to say, we come to rely on our capacity for reflective thought as the primary means of illumination. If we're not clear about something, we say, give me a bit of space, I need to think about that. And then we cogitate, we link one thought to another, and we build up a better picture. This process itself, this pattern of ordinary illumination, which can illuminate many things, which can solve many kinds of problems, engineering problems, problems in dentistry, problems of the allocation of parking attendants in Macclesfield, all of these sort of problems are dealt with by reflective thought. But it doesn't illuminate the point where you get caught. Because thought is the poacher turned gamekeeper. Thought steals your freedom. Thought screens the very self-existing natural awareness that we've all had from the very beginning, and it steals it by appearing to be helpfully in charge of the situation. That's why it's the gamekeeper. My thoughts will explain to me what the problem is. But the actual problem is created by reliance on thoughts as if they were the only source of illumination. Thoughts have a function. It'd be very difficult to live our lives, to carry out the normal things that we do without thoughts. But they only illuminate according to their particular remit. They're like a torch. The torch will give you, in a dark night, the torch will give you a little circle of light. But it will effectively darken what's outside that circle of light. The more thoughts reveal the world to us, what we are actually doing is buying into a particular vision, a particular cut of how things are, a cut which makes sense according to that pattern of illumination, but it won't do anything else. The more you do something, if it's not, if it has a limited remit, all you get is more intensity. You can get dog whistles, which are operating at a pitch much higher than the human ear hears. You could blow that quite softly, or you could blow it very, very hard. If you blow it very hard, that won't enable a human being to hear it. The louder it is, it will just agitate the dogs because they hear it. It won't get through to us because we don't have access to that dimension. So if you have that as an analogy, the more you do thinking, it will illuminate what thinking illuminates. And much of that is marvelous. There's nothing wrong with it. If you want to memorize the words of all Puccini's operas, fantastic. And you can sing along and have your karaoke and weep your tears. It's a very nice thing to do. A little nice coffee, some Turkish delight, and then singing and weeping. Why not? But it won't illuminate anything else. Thought illuminates the terrain of thought. This is why we do meditation. It's not to say that one thing is bad, but just to recognize this is the dimension it functions in, but we have access to other dimensions. So, in Buddhism, the first general practice that we do is taking refuge. We take refuge because we start to see the ensnaring nature of our ordinary ways of conceptualizing, and in particular, the power of karma. What karma means essentially is tendencies which seem to be true, something which seems to arrive with an inherent validity. Without doing any work, it seems to be just doing the right thing. When things are familiar to us, they sort of slot in. They just, oh yes. So that's what karma is. It's a particular contouring of the world, a particular set of familiarities which, when we encounter them, reassure us as to what our situation is. Generally speaking, karma is like that. Of course, we have bad karma, which is disturbing and moves across it. Karma is the result of activity. One of the things about the notion of the Buddhist reading of the world is that the basis of this world is morality. That all activity is developed according to its intention. And if your intention is negative, if it's narrow, if it's self-serving, then that creates a particular bias inside you whereby when future events happen to you, or when you move towards making future activities yourself, you'll find yourself narrow and knotted. That's just how it is. There are some cushions down here if you like. You're welcome. That's fine. So one of the reasons we need to have some kind of refuge is because the interweaving of tendencies, the complexity of ourselves, and the interweaving of all the complex factors in the field, everything outside us, other people's behavior, the weather, the economic climate, all of these things together mean that there's a constant reactivity. There's always something going on. We're always at a point of being stimulated and moved by things that are occurring. And if we stay inside that, we can have a busy life, an interesting life, what we might experience as a fulfilling life. We look back and think, well, it's not so bad. Done lots of things, travel, had friends, this and that. There's all of that richness, and yet somehow it's teetering just slightly out of control. We don't quite know where we are in it. Because of course, when subject and object are interacting, who we are is impacted by the environment around us. It's not as if when people speak to us, they say something and it goes into a little bowl in front of us and we look at it and then we can decide whether we pick it out of the bowl or not. The bowl is not out there, it's in our ear. People's words come right in here and they go here and into the heart and into the belly. And we are impacted. We're impacted before we know what it is that's hit us. And then we think, hang on, what was that? God, we're a bit slow. We've already been aggressed by the world. That's why this tangling keeps moving. Because our ego is not a ball. Our sense of self is not something secure, like some polished marble ball. It's very spongy, very sticky, full of tendrils, reaching out, being in contact and responding. This is why finding freedom by untying all the knots is very difficult, because they keep getting tied. Moment by moment, because we are part of the world, we are changed. So taking refuge is taking refuge from the trials and tribulations of the world, but also taking refuge from the fantasy of an autonomous self. The notion that as an individual person, as an ego, we are somehow autonomous, self-defining. I know who I am. I want to be true to myself. I want to be authentic. These sort of things sound very nice, but they're kind of meaningless. What does it mean to be true to yourself? You weren't like this 10 years ago. So if you weren't like it 10 years ago, you've cheated yourself, because now you've got a new authentic self. So what is this? Because we are part of the world, we are not stable. If we're not stable, how can we know what is true? If the truth of ourselves is not the content, because our thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, hopes, fears, desires, and so on are always changing, then what does it mean to be authentic? How can we tell if we're ringing true? How can we tell if this is me? Because if you have too much sense of being true to yourself, it cuts you off from being with other people. Because if you want to be close, if you want to collaborate, you have to compromise. You have to think the task is more important than my particular feeling. In work situations or in a family, you have to delegate. You have to say, well, why don't you do that? Okay. Oh, but why did you do it that way? Well, the person did it that way because they're them. If you want a job done well, do it yourself. That is the ego's phrase, because the ego always knows the right way to do it. The ego knows the right way to do it for them. As soon as you start to really delegate, you're faced with the fact that other people are not the same as you. And if you take that seriously, it means all that you believe in, all that you take to be completely real, is just your little world. Just your little relative take on things. It's not true. It's just what I like. I like my tea this way. I don't like it that way. I believe in this political party. I think this rock band's good. It's just an opinion. Well, what happens then? The ground's not so solid. What will I stand on? But it's true. No, it's not true. Oh. And that's the basis of a lot of depression. What will I rely on? Da-da-da-da. We have the Buddha! And he's very shiny. And he doesn't speak. So when we take refuge in the Buddha, we have the idea that there's somebody who's sorted, that there is a space which is not so entrammelled, not so caught up, not so endlessly provoked and provoking in its being in the world, but a possibility of calmness and clarity. The Buddha represents a mind which awakens from the dream of confusion, from enmeshment. We also take refuge in the Dharma, which is the Buddha's teaching, and it also represents the basis of what he taught, that is to say, the experience of things as they are, which he awakened to. Then we take refuge in the Sangha, which is the assembly of all the great teachers and practitioners who create a mood which supports our own practice. In taking this sort of refuge, we can believe there is something other than the state in which we find ourselves. So that rather than the need to defend our own position and keep it strong and clear, we see that there's maybe another possibility, a possibility which is proven by itself, which is beyond activity. Because all of us are very busy. Even if our external lives are not very busy, internally we're very busy. We're always on the job, always doing something, and there's always something to be done. Subject and object chase each other round and round, like a puppy chasing its own tail. Round and round. Always something. The Buddha represents a space in which that is not problematic. Inside Buddhism, as many of you will know, there are different readings of this situation. Why is that the case? Because human beings have heads. And inside these heads, they have lots of thoughts. And then they talk these thoughts and they come out. The history of Buddhism is the history of people blethering. It's also the history of people meditating. What you realize when you meditate can't come out your mouth. But anyway, we like to talk, so we say something, like I'm doing just now. So there are many different views, many different Buddhist understandings. They all generally point in the same direction, but they have different moods and qualities to them. Generally speaking, the practice of taking refuge is linked with renunciation, with the idea that this world we find ourselves in, samsara, is dangerous. It's like a swamp. And in many ways it is, because it's very intriguing, it's bewitching, it's also frightening. But we can't get away from the bad things, and we can't get enough of the good things. No matter how sharp our scissors, we can't cut a clear line around what's good for us and what's bad for us. We find ourselves in something which we don't really understand. We're alive. We don't really know why we're alive. We wander about. We're not quite sure what to do. You go to the shops. What will you buy? You buy, you look at it. What's it all about? Why were we born? This is very troubling. Let's not think about it. Life's better when you don't think about things. Better to be stupid in some way. And we're lucky. We live in a culture which offers us millions of ways of being stupid. We have fantastic drugs that are developed. There are all these criminal scientists everywhere in their little laboratories coming up with new things so you can dance for days on end. It's wonderful. Ayahuasca, very popular nowadays. So many drugs. Kinds of alcohol, very cheap. Alcopops, what a wonderful invention. Get children drunk earlier. On the one hand, you give them GCSEs, you give them A-levels and optimal anxiety. On the other hand, you give them sweetened alcohol to get them unconscious at the weekend. Fantastic. This is the culture that we live in. Endless possibilities for trying to manage your situation, for setting this up against that, up, down, up, down. It's very, very tiring. What does it mean then to renounce the world? In its traditional form, that would be to become a monk or a nun, to withdraw, to live in a monastery, and to not be involved. But you're still dependent. You're dependent on other people for producing your food, for producing your clothing, and so on. Subject and object are born together. Self and other are born together. We all came out of our mother's belly. We're not abstract phenomena floating in space. We're born in tears of joy and pain, and we're born in blood. We're in the world. We're part of the world. And we interact with the world all the time. So where are you going to leave this world to and go to? Monasteries are in the world. They need support, they need sponsors, and they're full of politics. They're full of backstabbing. I mean, the history of Tibetan Buddhism is just one of people being shafted. But Islam is exactly the same. Sufi orders burn down other Sufi orders things. You have these ghastly Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. You get minority persecuted groups like the Ahmadiyya and so on. All over the world, politicians, religious people, people in freedom-loving sects and so on, everybody hates each other. Why? Because the bad's not outside. The bad's inside. And we can't separate the bad from the good. We can't say, well, the right side's good and the left side's bad, so gradually I'm going to chop my left hand off, and then I'll cut my left ear off and pluck my left eye out. I can only see good things now. That would be crazy. We live mixed up. So if we're mixed up, how are you going to renounce anything? Because the one who's doing the renouncing might be the wrong bit. Uh-oh. We can't trust ourselves. What we're going to do, this Saturday morning's getting worse and worse. Sitting here in the rain wondering. Group paranoia. Don't drink the orange juice, there might be something in it. It's very important to see this. The fantasy that there's somewhere to go to, somewhere else, is a big illusion. Change of government. Mr. Obama, maybe he'll bring something, but he won't bring as much as everybody hopes. He can't, because the systems are snared. And the system's not some kind of guys in suits in a back room smoking cigars. The system is everything. The system is the entropy of the public transport system. It's just the torpor that pervades bureaucratic structures. It's very difficult to change these things. And it's inside ourselves. As the old saying is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, the first part really of refuge is thinking, I need refuge from myself. So how can I take refuge in a way that gives me refuge from myself? The answer to that lies in the practice of meditation, where we start to observe ourselves. We just simply see, how do I function? How do I operate? And we start to live with the complexity of our existence, not falling into it and merging with it, but also not trying to push it away, not being in disgust with ourselves, not feeling overwhelmed and full of horror at ourselves. And we start to offer real hospitality to ourselves, seeing ourselves as we are. That we have good thoughts, good intentions, bad intention, that our mind is clear and then it's confused. The more we do that, we can start to be tolerant of ourselves and also amazed at this unceasing complexity. And through that we can start to be aware of the complexity of other people. Because one of the great violences that we do is to have a very operational sense of other people. We treat other people as commodities, as utilities. We want them to perform a function. But they are complicated. We are all much more complicated than we appear to be. We are not just divided against ourselves, as if it was a force of light and a force of dark. But we are multi-stranded, multi-voiced, incredibly rich, full of potential to perform many, many different things. But we disguise that to ourselves because of this incredible demand, I should be one thing. I should be just me, myself. I should be able to give a coherent account of who I am. We fail in that task all the time because we are incoherent. Other people are incoherent too. They are there and they don't cohere. They don't all come together. When we start to see that, we see other people are incredibly rich. We have so many possibilities. How will you deal with something very complex? With great tenderness. If you have a hammer, you can drop it on the ground. It doesn't matter too much. In fact, the hammer might break the tiles on the floor. If you have a computer, it's not a good idea to drop it on the ground. Computers are very complicated. They need to be lifted carefully and placed carefully. It's the same with people. People are very, very complicated. We should be sweet and gentle to each other. Actually, we're quite rough. We're really rough. We're engaged in a war in Afghanistan. Our boys are out there sorting these people out. As soon as we see the complexity of the human situation, we realize this is madness. It's absolute madness. Because the Taliban are not simply bad people. These Taliban are linked through family alliances with many other people. And they're also linked into the wide family of Islam. And so you can't overcome people with violence. It's not possible. This is the part of the problem in our world. And when we look into the history of these things, one of the reasons that the people in Afghanistan are good at fighting is because everybody tries to invade their country. The British fought many wars there. The British invaded Iraq. Outside Baghdad, we have a huge cemetery from the First World War. Britain is a warmongering nation. We go all around the world attacking other people, thinking we have the truth and we want to bring them civilization and so on, because we have something good. This is disrespectful of other people's complexities. This is incredibly important, because once we see how rich things are, we stop. If we recognize these Indian people living in the Amazon jungle, how much they know about nature, how much they know about plants. And then these loggers come in with these huge machines, just tearing up the jungle. So you have something very subtle, very articulated, and something very crude. And what wins? Well, the crude. The crude wins every time. And this is part of our problem in samsara. Not only do we do crude things outside, but we do crude things to ourselves. When we raise children, we say, you better behave or you'll be in trouble. So we think, oh, fear is a very good thing. Here's a little child exploring the world. They're not particularly bad. They just got lots of energy and they bang into things. And we hit them. In my education in Scotland, I was hit a great deal by teachers who seemed to think that that was a good idea. It was probably a good idea for them to release some of the tensions from their own marital disharmony and so on. But doing it to poor little boys was not a good idea. But it's the idea, I can make you do what I think is good for you. I can force you to do that. And I think it's so important for us to recall how much force we have experienced from the world, in our childhood in particular, but also in work situations. The contempt you might have been treated with by managers and so on. But also how much force you bring towards the world. How we work to get our own way, to control situations. And in that moment of the movement of our desire, we're not really interested in the other person's situation. We're not really interested whether the plumber's got problems or not. We just want the plumber to come in, do his job and leave. And you can't find any plumbers like that. Because why won't people just do what they would do? Very attractive. Read the editorial in the Daily Mail. Life is very simple there. But actually, life is very complicated. And this is at the heart of Dzogchen. Although it's about simplicity, on one level, what it is suggesting that our actual lived existence is never simple. And in fact, the main way that we make our lives more complicated is to imagine that our lives could be simple. External events, because they're happening in a matrix of incredibly complex causes and effects, and vectors of forces that we don't even know or understand, is beyond our control. Like this economic crisis. All of these banks all over the world changing, how many people will be unemployed, what this will mean for the future of the city of London, for example. Probably Frankfurt will become more powerful, which means that Britain, having very little industrial base, we are likely to become poor quite quickly. That's what all the factors would indicate. But who knows? Maybe something else will happen. Some new fantasy will take people over. This is the world that we live in. Nobody really knows. So, starting to experience the complexity of the world allows us to think, what's the use of thinking so much? Worrying, being anxious, making lots of plans. What is actually here? Who is the one who is having this experience? Is my experience most fully revealed to me through the particular lenses of my current obsessions, my current patterns of thinking? Or when I relax and allow the world to be there, to allow it to impinge on me in all its richness, and I feel the plural responses, the multiple responses that arise in me, what is that like? We have this word ambivalence. And I would suggest probably we're ambivalent about most things in our lives. And often that seems like a problem. We'd rather be straightforward. We'd rather know what's what. But maybe life isn't like that. Maybe that is an illusion. It's seeking simplicity and clarity in the domain of complexity. Through the practice of meditation and the practice of understanding the view, we start to see there's plenty of simplicity, there's plenty of clarity, it's just not where we've been looking for it. If you want to buy spinach, don't go into the butcher's. It's just that simple. Thoughts don't sell simplicity. They are not the means of production for simplicity. Thoughts are fabulous for complexity. Enjoy your thoughts. You've got lots of them. You could have more. They could be even more interesting. There's nothing wrong with them, and they will perform fabulous functions, but they won't give you simplicity and clarity. And when we come to die, if we rest inside these thoughts, as they dissolve, we'll become very confused. Every night when we fall asleep, our investment in our thoughts as the main factor for making sense of the world starts to relax. And we surrender into sleep. We let go. Clearly, we're here today, so we managed to get through the night. We woke up, and here we are. We can remember something about yesterday. In fact, we probably remember more about yesterday than about our sleep. So not being in our thoughts is not the basis of the continuity of our existence as existence. Being in our thoughts is the basis of the continuity of the elaborated notions of ourselves. So taking refuge in Buddhism from the point of view of Dzogchen is to begin to observe what is going on as something dynamic and moving. For example, here we are in this room. We look around, we see the shapes and the colors. These shapes and colors appear to be there just by themselves. We take it for granted that, we've got a sense this is a statue of the Buddha. I'm sure everybody here can see this is a statue of the Buddha. Why is it a statue of the Buddha? Because we say it's a statue of the Buddha. The statue itself is not a statue of anything in itself. If your mind doesn't meet this statue of the Buddha, it's not a statue of the Buddha. All phenomena are co-emergent. That is to say, there are no self-existing entities. Everything arises as experience. Now you might say, well, the statue was here yesterday. During the night, no one was in this building, and yet the statue is here this morning. Clearly, the statue has a life of its own. But when you're not here, you don't know what happens. Some of you may have seen the Nutcracker Ballet. What these guys get up to when no one's around at night, we don't know. We know from some of the paintings that these gods are very into sex. They have sex for a very long time, so all sorts of things might be going on. We say this is the Buddha. We have learned about the Buddha, and we learn to recognize the shape of the statue, and so we say Buddha. Without our saying Buddha, the statue is nothing. It's something, it's shape and color, but that shape and color to somebody who doesn't know Buddha is just a shape and a color. They will then make sense of it according to the dispositions in their head. So they might think it is an infidel image. This is an image made by non-believers, and they try to destroy it. They might think, well, it's probably worth, 250 quid in scrap. It's a good thing to nick. God knows what it is, but we'll be able to do a few lines of coke tonight. people in Macclesfield, I'm sure there are some people who will feel that. That's all it is. It's a means to an end. The important thing here is to recognize your mind is implicated in your life. It's not that you are living in yourself, walking about in this big world. There isn't any big world. There is your big world. Because when you see this statue and you see it's the Buddha, that immediately hooks in your being all your memories, thoughts, and associations about the Buddha. And that will be different for each of you. We can agree in terms of the linguistic signifier, this is a statue of the Buddha. Yes. But what that evokes in us will be different. This is our naked lived existence. This is us. In this moment, this is my existence. It's not some theory, it's not something somewhere else. This is what I get. And the more we attend to ourselves, we can start to think, my God, how dull and stupid I am. I'm living in this world, I'm co-creating this world, and I'm taking it for granted. I think, well, the cars are just there. But some people are really interested in cars and some people are not interested in cars. So people who are interested in cars, when they see cars, they're curious. Other people just think, ugh, this is the world. This is how it is. So, are you there? In being there, what do you bring to being there? This is what meditation is about. To help us to be here in the world as it is and experience it as an ceaseless, dynamic flow of experience. Colors, shapes, noises, signifiers, interpretations, feeling tones, sensations in the body. This is changing all the time. Now, we might know this in an abstract way. Yeah, I know my life's like that. So what? So what's also dynamic? There is no place to step out of the river. There is no solid ground anywhere. Taking refuge is to accept impermanence, to see moment by moment everything is flowing. Now, I can be unconscious in that process. I can be trying to make sense of it in terms of abstract categories by thinking about it. Or I can relax and be as open and present with it as possible, participating in a world which is co-emergent. That is to say, I am this world. In that sense, refuge is enlightenment if you take refuge in the right thing. Refuge is awakening. If we take refuge in phenomena as if they are telling us something about ourselves, if we take refuge in our ordinary sense of self, then everything is obscured, even as it becomes clearer. When we relax and open into awareness, everything is revealed even as we give up control about it. Because actually, none of us know. Nobody knows what the future will be. Nobody knows what will happen, this afternoon. Nobody knows. We have to be there. So all we have is really a choice in how are we going to be there. Are we going to be there mediated through our habits, the habitual editing that we do all the time, attending to the things we like, not attending to the things we don't like? Or can we start to observe that our habits, our familiar thoughts, our expectations, which appear to be the building blocks of our ordinary sense of self, can we start to see that these are in fact dynamic? Thoughts come and go, and then they're gone. And then another thought comes. So even if a familiar thought comes, that thought is there just in the moment that it's there. Somehow thoughts seem to extrude or give out an aura of permanence, which is something quite remarkable. So I can say, I like tea. I like tea more than coffee. When I say that, it's gone. But you can remember that, oh, James likes tea more than coffee. So now we have some definite knowledge about James's preferences. And it appears to be something solid. But it's only something which manifests when we remember it or think about it or activate it. And then it leads into making tea or coffee. That is to say, the thought arises and it leads the body to one jar rather than another jar. And then something happens in a cup which is either drunk or not drunk. That's all. These are all chains of activity. Nothing is arrived at anywhere. All our lives, if you think back to being a small child, running and playing and riding your bicycle and so on, and then going to school and learning things, and the years go by and the years go by. And the years go by because we live in time. Everything is in time. And what is it to be living in time? What is it to be time but the ceaseless display of gesture, posture, speech, breath? All we do is move in time. And where do we move? We move in a world which is moving with us. Because these streets are also moving. They're moving because the color of the bricks changes with the rain. The rain hits the wall and the brick gets darker. The name of the street stays the same, but when the rain goes onto the name plaque on the street, it starts to glisten in the light. So on an abstract level, it's the same. But on the lived level, it's always fresh, always changing. If that is true, and everything's changing all the time, and we're also changing, it's very complicated. So how can we be simple in the midst of all this complexity? Dzogchen, I bring you the good news. People have been doing this for a long time. Of course, life's a wee bit simpler in Tibet. You just have a couple of yaks and a cow. But in this world of real complexity, what we need is space. Space and complexity are absolutely linked. We are quite a lot of people in this room. We will have a tea break soon, or a coffee break, depending on your preference. And in that, people will get up. There is a small kitchen and there are 2 toilets. So this requires some awareness of whether you stand in a queue to have a pee or you go into the kitchen to get a cup of tea. This is what we do all the time. So that means being in space with others. And because there are a lot of people in a small space, you have to be more aware. If you came into the building on your own and you had all of this space, you could dance, you could move around, you could be very generous and flamboyant in your gestures, and it wouldn't matter. But because there are a lot of people, you have to be a bit careful. Yeah? That shows a very simple principle. If things are going to be allowed to have their own movement and their own shape, they require space. Yeah? So if we don't have much space inside us, if we are full of habitual expectations, if we are full of judgments and prejudices, we won't have much space to offer the world. And if the world is complicated, and we are narrow and tight, and these 2 factors come in conflict together, what will we have? Suffering, which I believe the Buddha talked about. Suffering arises from attachment because we are attached to habitual assumptions about how the world is. And so instead of being of generous heart, instead of being open to the moment as it comes and moving with circumstances and allowing our manifestation to be how it will be, we hold on to definitions of who I am, what I need, what I like, what I don't like, and then we have to find a way of finding little doors and cracks in the world so that we can get what we want, because we have a shape, and so we are a niched product, but we can't always find the niche to stick our product into. That's why we get a lot of frustration in life. This is just the perfect thing for me. Where did you get it? In Spain. Oh God. In Spain. Don't they have that in London? No, only in Spain. Oh God, but it's the one best thing. I've never seen one like that before. This is what happens to us. So, the more furniture you have in your head, the more assumptions and accumulations, the more difficult it is to relate to the world. In the Wheel of Life, that we see on the back wall there, and you can look at in the break if you're not familiar with it, on the outer circle, it has a representation of ignorance, represented as a blind old woman. In the blind old woman, she's a woman because woman represents wisdom, and she's blind because she's lost her way. So that's what ignorance is. It's the potential of wisdom that's somehow not carrying out its proper function. That is to say, instead of our basic intelligence being panoramic and inclusive, as with a blind person stumbling with their stick, it becomes tentative. And in being tentative, anxiety and clarity becomes mixed up together. So we try to make sense of things, and it's a lot of work, and we're not quite sure. This is our normal way of proceeding. And this leads into the second level of compounding or creating, and it's represented by a potter at his wheel. He has a mass of clay, and from that mass of clay he's making shapes. This is a very simple image, but very helpful, because the clay represents the potential of the situation, and the potter is making a shape, and when he's got the right shape, he cuts it off. So now he's got a bowl. The bowl is made of clay. That is to say, it's made out of the world. It's part of the world. It's part of the mass. But once the shape is separated, it appears to be something self-existing. And then we add more and more signifiers to it. It's this kind of a cup. I want to have that cup. I'd like it painted blue, and so on. We start to elaborate. This is the basis of the furniture in our head. All the ways in which we construct what we take to be fixed entities out of this world. Everything is just this world. It's radiant and it's luminous. We're part of the world. We're able and entitled to be in it and to act and respond, to be touched and moved and so on. What we can't do is take anything away. There's no doggy bags. There's no little pockets, to nick a bit of stuff. The world is the world. When you die, your possessions become other people's possessions. You were merely using them in the course of your life. It is as if you owned them. It is as if this body is yours. This body is made up of the 5 elements. This body is made up of blood and bones and so on that represent earth, water, fire, wind, space. It appears to be me, it appears to be mine, and yet it's influenced by so many things in the world. So a central factor as the basis of our practice is to start to observe the grasping way we approach the world, the way we hang on to some things and reject other things. Often what we reject diminishes our freedom, because in order to respond to the widest range of possibilities, we have to have many, many things. We have to have all the things in the world. Some people are very nice, and they like to be very nice. And because they're very nice, they get exploited. One of the things they don't want is the capacity to say fuck off, because they think it's not a good thing to say fuck off. It's not good or bad. In a sense, it's neutral. Sometimes it's necessary to say fuck off, because it's one of the energetic movements in the world. Sometimes it's necessary to be selfish. That is to say, if somebody is very needy and they pester you all the time for more, you have to say, I don't have anything more to give you. I'm not interested in you. Take care of yourself. That may sound terribly mean and terribly harsh. It can also be incredibly helpful, because it starts to help people wake up to their own resources and so on. So if we have a very narrow notion of who we are, then the repertoire of responses we can make to other people is always going to be determined by, how does this make me feel about myself? Well, I wouldn't feel good saying that. This is one of the big things that comes up in therapy. You know, you can outline all kind of things that a patient could do, but they often won't do it because it doesn't feel like me. Yeah, but why would you want to feel like you? You're coming to NHS psychotherapy. But the touchstone, the testing point of their existence is, does it ring true for me as an ego? But we are all rather diminished, rather restricted in what we can do. We look around the world and we see other people do things. They get away with it, but we couldn't do it. How is that? What do we imagine would happen if we did what they did? This is why in this Tibetan system we have these wrathful gods. You've got flames coming out of them. You have gods in sexually aroused states. You get gods in very peaceful and beautiful states, because they're saying anger, desire, pride, all of these can be transformed. If you say they are simply poisonous, they are simply bad and negative, then you shrink yourself in. But these are forms of relation in the world. It's not that you should be devouring the world or be angry all the time. It's to recognize these are simply qualities of energy. A good DJ is able to work with the crowd and to get the feel of the people and put on the kind of music that will get people dancing. That's their job. So they have to be able to play the music that will get people dancing, not the music they like. A bad DJ plays what they like. Good DJ feels what people are into. That's what the Buddha does. Buddha comes into the world and shows many different ways. In the Wheel of Life, again, it shows there are 6 main realms of existence. The Buddha goes to each of these realms and shows different forms. In some form, he's offering simply cooling water or blankets. In others, he's teaching the Dharma. In others, he's just being very sweet and gentle, according to what people need. Now, the central idea in Dzogchen is that we shouldn't limit ourselves. Everything is possible if we have basic clarity. Some people think, well, if I don't control myself, I'll do very bad things. In Dzogchen we would say, oh, this is very unlikely. If you really open to yourself, if you're present and aware, why would you do any bad things? If you observe yourself and you think of the worst things you've done in your life, the most harmful things, the most selfish things, and you think back to the moment when you did these, most likely your mind was very small. You become fixated. Maybe you're very jealous, or you're very angry, and you become very small. The blinkers come on and you're fully in that, and you hit someone, or you steal something, or you set someone up in some way. That was not very spacious. Bad things arise from a lack of relaxation. This is not what most of us have been told. Many people are still taught in childhood, basically, you're bad. And unless you're careful, you will do bad. So be careful. Keep an eye on you. And I'm certainly going to keep an eye on you. So the struggle is to restrain oneself and to not trust oneself. And to basically think, inside me there are all these impulses and tendencies that will cause me to do bad things. From the point of view of Dzogchen, this is not true. It says our nature from the very beginning is pure and open. And by integrating with this, our action will be precise and clear, attuned to the situation. everything is possible as an aspect of compassion if it's grounded in the wisdom of openness. If it's not grounded in that, then it's mere self-indulgence, and indeed, then one should be a bit careful. Okay, shall we take a little break there and come back, say, in 20 minutes? Okay, let's continue. Here in this centre, they've got regular meetings for people doing Refuge and bodhicitta and basic practices. So there's plenty of explanation there about the actual forms that we can do of Refuge and so on, and I won't go into the detail of that. But I think it is a very important and useful thing to keep reviewing for yourself what it is that you rely on. What is it that you take refuge in yourself? Because only if you know that yourself can you find the exact quality of the attached ego which seeks to depend on something. So that's going to be different for different people. We all right there in the front stalls? Well, we could do very big group therapy if you like. Oh, very good. If in doubt, let it out. Because when you start to see for yourself what you rely on, and you examine what it is, you start to see how you cheat yourself. That because things are impermanent and unreliable, and because we tend to be anxious and needy and uncertain, when we cling to outer forms as if they will provide us with stability, grief is already written into the beginning of that story. The outer form can't provide us with what we need. And there is a great sadness in that, especially when we think back maybe to our parents and to people we know, and we see how much time and effort people spent being attached and believing in things, and then were cheated. I remember my father talking about this slogan from the Second World War, "A land fit for heroes," which they started to pump out towards the end of the war. That when the soldiers came back, there would be a proper new system for them. And of course it wasn't true. My father had been working in a bank, and when he was in the army for a long time, when he came back into that, he found that all the good jobs had been taken by the people who, for various reasons, had managed to avoid going to war. And these people were very kind of both guilty and hyper-defended, so they wanted a cover-up. So they started to make a policy that what happened in the war had nothing to do with the bank. So people's war records couldn't be taken into account. And that's what happens. And all these young boys going off and fighting in the wars now, same when they come home, nobody gives a damn. That's a fact. What's presented at the beginning, when you're healthy and walking on two legs, and what you get when you're in a wheelchair is very different. That's how the world is. It's not bad people do these things. That's just an extreme form of what happens to ourselves. So we have to think, why do we get taken in by fantasies that things will be better than they are? Because as long as our energy is primarily moving out towards the objects of the world, towards people, places, possessions, we're at the mercy of these things remaining as we expect them to remain. And there is no freedom in that. There's a sort of pseudo-freedom that comes from being a skillful operator, being able to use whatever qualities one has, intelligence, strength, beauty, and so on. All of these can be ways of accessing resources in the world. But they don't give us very much power over the situation. So, just observing, oh, this is what I do. This is the pattern of my hopes and fears. This is how I shape not just my existence, but who I take myself to be. The more we see that, the more we have a sense of what needs to be let go of. And all the preliminary practices that we have, the general Mahayana practices, the Theravadan, Shamatha and Vipassana, the tantric practices of transformation, they are all concerned with increasing conscious intentionality so that we develop a clear sense, this is how I want to live, and they involve the mobilization of the will to power. I am going to make this happen. I'm going to focus my attention on this, and I'm not going to be distracted. I'm going to repeat all these mantras. I'm going to do these prostrations. I'm going to visualize this. By maintaining my conscious intention, I will give myself a place to stand apart from the swirling tides, the waves of habitual impulse. So that instead of being just carried along like a leaf in a river at the mercy of the turbulence of the waves of experience, I will determine a particular reading of the situation and I will cleave to that. These paths are very useful and very helpful. They do require a lot of energy because they have to be maintained. They have to be maintained. If you don't maintain them, they won't be operating. It's like an umbrella. If you don't hold it up, it won't do its work. So you have to be consciously attentive when you do it. If you don't do it, you will get swept away by experience. Now, in our culture, we've had many, many years of ease. Britain's been reasonably wealthy. We haven't been directly involved in war too much. We haven't been invaded. We haven't had mass disasters. It could well be that in the future, if there's economic decline and greater social turbulence, life will become more difficult. And all the paths of instant gratification that people have become used to, quick, easy access to others on mobile phones, plenty of computer games, cheap food in the shops, many of these quick ways of soothing ourselves may be removed. The government will need a lot of money. It's likely to put a lot more tax on alcohol, for example. So people will have to live more directly with the grimness of their existence. This grimness, in a sense, has always been there, but it's often hidden. Working in a hospital, I see people on crutches and wheelchairs every day. You know, it's a very helpful reminder that although I'm walking about, I don't know what state I'll be in tomorrow. People suddenly get sick. They get a bit of a twinge and they go to the doctor and suddenly they're being cut open. That happens. None of us knows the internal state of our body. Accidents happen in cars, they happen to people in airplanes and so on. Danger is actually all around us. This is not to become frightened of that, but to realize that being asleep in the fantasy of the continuity of phenomena in the pattern that we've grown accustomed to is not very helpful. Because when things suddenly change, we don't know what to do. Last night we were sitting talking about darning. As we do. Because not many people know how to darn socks anymore. And even the kind of socks that you can buy in the shops are difficult to darn. And even basic skills of knitting, they vanish. So all these old traditions of security and self-help, of feeling that one is an agent in the world, a lot of these have been lost. Many people just know you go to the shops. You just go to the shops and you get something. Now that's very nice as long as it lasts. But international capitalism could shift and we could be in another world altogether. And then instead of people having a tradition learnt when they were small, helping their mum doing baking and so on, instead of having these recipes in the tips of your fingers, knowing exactly what to do with a mixing bowl, you're gone. You're at the mercy of not knowing. So the more we have started to depend on the automatic supply of everything we need, that has been very pleasant on one level, but it's also a manifestation of stupidity, because we don't understand cause and effect. And the Buddha's basic teaching is about cause and effect. All phenomena, all dharmas arise from causes. There are no self-existing phenomena at all. Everything in the shops is made by someone else, somewhere else. And this collapse in the international economy is a very helpful reminder of the truth of dependent co-origination. It's not just something that happens in America with their mortgage things, but it goes over all across the world. At the time of the Vietnam War, there was the image of the domino effect was used a lot, the sense that if communism is successful in one country, it will lead to communism in another and another. But what we actually see is it's the capitalism that has the domino effect, because one economy crashes and then another and another and another, because they're all so interlinked. This international capitalist movement means everything is interdependent. Buddhists have thought this for a long time, but now it becomes manifest. There is nowhere to hide. Lots of people still want to emigrate to New Zealand because they calculate that the winds there will carry less nuclear waste than in other places. But imagine the sort of people who are emigrating there and then think, well, would you want to have your last moments shared with the residents of Surrey? So, ghastly thought. Let's stay at home with a wee bottle, eh? Chips in a bottle. Here we go. Bye-bye. So interdependence brings us back again to the fact we can't cut ourselves off. We can't find a private individual enlightenment, a personal liberation. Liberation has to be the liberation of all things, because they are all connected. In the Mahayana path, we talk of taking the bodhisattva vow, an intention to save all sentient beings, to make oneself available for all sentient beings. And this is often seen as a heroic task, that I will sacrifice my individual enlightenment in order to be available for others. The fact is, your enlightenment is linked with other people. If you live in South Africa, say in Johannesburg, you live in a gated community, you have razor wire, you've got instant teams that will come round with machine guns to protect you, and you may be safe to a certain extent. But when you drive in your car, you have the doors locked and you're always frightened that someone's going to attack you. People drive through red lights because they're frightened to stop in case someone smashes in the window. There is no protection because you have to be in the world. Howard Hughes ended up living in a room sealed off from everything in order to be safe. That's very sad. Life means connection, and connection means being with other people. Now, how to be with other people? If you've already decided some people are bad and some people are good, and you want to be with the good people and you don't want to be with the bad people, but somehow you're going to end up being with the bad people, what are you going to do? You don't know how to be with the so-called bad people because they're bad and you wouldn't want to know anything about them except they're bad. But actually, we have to be able to be with everything. We have to be able to negotiate with selfish people, angry people, cruel people, dangerous people. What helps here is an understanding of Buddha nature. Even the most dangerous people have Buddha nature. Why are they dangerous? Because they're frightened. If you try to control people, they will not feel very welcomed. They will probably not feel very safe. And if they don't feel very safe, they'll feel anxious. And if their protection against anxiety is to be violent, they're likely to hit you. So if you work with mentally disordered patients, it's quite easy to get them to hit you. Oh, it's quite easy to get them not to hit you. It depends on whether you're afraid of them or not. Why wouldn't you be afraid of a dangerous person? Because people are not just dangerous. But once you read in the notes, risk assessment, this person is very dangerous, and you go in thinking this person is very dangerous, you've already protected yourself against them. You're defended. You think they're dangerous, I don't like being with them. And your own aura is now vibrating in a way that's going to be picked up by them. This is a big question, isn't it? Can we really believe in the Buddha nature or the potential of all beings? And if we do that, that is the main focus of our attention. We also hold in mind that all beings have the 5 poisons: stupidity, anger, desire, jealousy, pride, and that many, many multitudes of small confusions and distorted visions and behaviors that arise from that. Both are present simultaneously. The openness, the potential, and the defendedness, the narrowness, the me first, the dangerousness. It's not either or. It's not that all beings are beautiful. They're not. It's not that all beings are shit. They're not. It's both. So, how to be open and precise.
If you be proven innocent until they're found to be guilty, is to take it for granted that there could be potential to be innocent and not violent. And until they do hit you, then that's how you treat them.
Right. But I think that's true, and we can also behave in a way that will minimize the likelihood of their hitting us. Yeah, which includes knowing that they might hit us. Because one of the ways to make violent people hit you is to be too nice. Because there's nothing as annoying as a smug bugger. That'll get right up anyone's nose. And how are you today? So it's finding a way to do this is difficult. In Tantra, they took up the same idea. And when we do that kind of practice, we visualize the deity, we recite the mantra, and we enter into a relationship with the deity. The deity is, as it were, the shining presence of that which we cannot recognize in ourselves. The deity is, if you like, the projection of our own Buddha nature, so that we can see it. We can't see it directly in ourselves, but by seeing the deity in front of ourselves, seeing Padmasambhava, Tara, and so on, we see this luminous being surrounded by rays of light. We imagine their face smiling, rays of light are pouring from them into us, and we feel illuminated and purified. And then these two forms merge together. At that point, we have the state of openness, and then gradually we come back into the world, but a world in which all the forms are the form of the deity, all sounds are mantra, and all thoughts and mental experiences are inseparable from the deity's mind. This is the tantric method of experiencing the inseparability of the ground Buddha nature and the complexity of manifestation. It's a very effective method, and in this Dharma center here you can practice these methods and get a clear understanding of them. they're particularly useful when we have a lot of self-doubt. Because when we come to Dzogchen, we're concerned with the immediate presence of our ever-enlightened state. And if we have many negative thoughts, if we have a sort of heavy sense about ourselves, if we're basically depressed and anxious, it's very difficult to see this. It's very difficult to believe it, and even more difficult to directly taste it. Because our gaze is always tilted towards the more substantial quality of negative thoughts and feelings. You know, if a thought arises, I'm stupid, or I can't meditate, or I don't understand this, oh, it's quite solid. At least I know what I am. I'm stupid. If you think, I'm open, and then you go into the meditation where you are completely open, that's much more difficult because it's not the familiar sense of self. The real renunciation is not about pushing things away. In the path of Dzogchen, we talk about self-liberation, which means that as you relax, all the building blocks, all the habitual thoughts, feelings and sensations out of which we create the substantial sense of ourselves are allowed to go free. It doesn't mean that there's nothing left, because the next thing arises, then the next, then the next. The mind never stops. And what we start to see is, I'm always something and I'm not anything. When you wake up in the morning, you have early morning thoughts. And then you do your teeth, and then you have your breakfast, and then you go in and you have your work sort of thoughts. And these thoughts are different all the way through the day. Then you have your evening thoughts. The thoughts don't stop. Each thought comes and it engages with the environment, which reveals itself in a particular way, and then it's gone. The dynamic movement of the non-duality of subject and object is what we live in all the time. This is all there is. The more present we are, the more we experience that. So we don't have to hang on to everything, because thoughts keep coming. No one thought is the truth. There is no answer to life's problems. There is no solution. There is no golden key. There is no magical, now I've arrived, safe at last. Because there's nowhere to be safe. That doesn't mean we're in danger. It means the very way of thinking that says, I need to get out of here and go to somewhere else where it's safe, is an illusion. It's a false notion of the problem. So, Garab Dorje, this great being who brought the Dzogchen teachings into the human domain, presented his final statement in 3 brief points, and we use these to look at the view of Dzogchen now. The first of these is to experience directly what we are. I can say something about this in words, and we can do the meditation together, but essentially the work of recognizing oneself is a work that each person has to do in their own meditation. Words are not enough. It's about looking and looking and looking. Not trying to make something happen, but just very gently seeing how things are. The mind's nature, that is to say, our basic nature, who we are, because the mind is inseparable from ourselves. We sit in this room with various thoughts and feelings and so on. We know we're here. But who is here? Who is the one who is here now? Who is the one looking out of your eyes, listening through your ears? Who is the one who feels the sensations of your body? This is an awareness. Who is the one who is aware? Normally, we short circuit that. We say, I am. And we leave it at that. Because we know, well, I'm alive, things happen, this is me, this is my life. This is the screen of ignorance. What we need to do is to look, who is the one who says, I am the one? I am is the big answer to everything. Who did that? Me. We always know, but the answer comes in so quickly. It acts as a kind of screen. It stops looking and seeing, because I am is a thought. It doesn't feel like a thought, but if we observe every statement we make about I am, it's just arising and passing. It has no validity beyond the immediacy of expressing itself, but it seems to speak an eternal truth. So, who is the one who experiences? This is the mind itself, sometimes translated as presence or awareness. This presence is pure from the very beginning. This means not pure as opposed to impure. It means not mixed with anything, untouched by anything. Our ordinary mind, our daily mind is always mixed up with something. Hopes, fears, liking, not liking. Something happens and it touches us, it gets to us, then we have a longing and we move out. Ordinary consciousness is created out of, or is the form of, ceaseless interaction with the environment. This activity of interaction with the environment is an impermanent flow which is occurring all the time. It's just stuff moving on, moving on. When we are in it, when we believe in it, we think, this is me. But who is the one who is having the experience? This mind is not touched by the thoughts. If each thought was you, then you would have to keep it, because it's you. It would be part of you. And you would get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then eventually, pop, you'd explode. So, where have your morning thoughts gone? Where's all your breakfast thoughts gone? They're gone. They were your thoughts. You were completely identified with them. You acted as if they were a true account of who you are, and they're gone. So, you have some thoughts now. Who is the one having the thoughts now? The one who is present with your thought now is the same as the one who was present with your thoughts at 9 o'clock this morning, but the thoughts have changed. The content changes, but the state of awareness does not. This is the most fundamental understanding. Traditional example for this is a mirror. The mirror shows endless reflections. The mirror has no resistance to reflections. Whatever is put in front of a mirror is displayed in the mirror. This is like us. Somebody tells us a joke and we laugh. Somebody tells us a sad story and we feel sad. We might even cry. We just get filled up with stuff. It's just like that. Hopes, fears, boom, boom, all the time. Events evoke us. Something happens. Good thoughts and bad thoughts arise all the time. But who do they happen to? This mind itself has no content. It's like a mirror. When you look in the mirror, you don't see the mirror. The mirror shows what's in front of it. When we're children, people tell us lots of things about us. First of all, they tell us what our name is. Our name is not our name, it's a name that somebody else uses on us. They say, oh, you're James. Oh, okay. We don't know why we're called what we're called, or maybe there's some family story about it, but generally we have this name. It is very important. Because your name came from the world, it's not your real name. In the tantric tradition, you get endless numbers of names, which are very helpful because they show what you call yourself is just a social gesture. But we get so fixated on our name that when someone calls our name, we say, yes, here I am. Who is here? James is here. This is stupidity. Because when you know the answer before the question is hardly articulated, you show yourself to be nothing but a smart arse. If you remember in primary school when the teacher would say, and what's this? There's always some little wanker with his hand up. No, we have become this wanker. Who did that? I did it. It's me. There's no time for any, let's see what's there. We're immediately there with the answer. This answer is the big stupidity. And this is really, really important, that we are made stupid by our own intelligence. It's not that there is some alien ignorance that has taken us over, like sort of waves coming down from Martians in a helicopter. We ourselves dazzle ourselves by the effulgence of our own creativity and fall in love with it. It's not true. It is beautiful. It is our intelligence, but it's just a story. We tell stories all the time. They have no more status than stories. I'm young, I'm old, I'm successful, I'm not successful. Hopes and fears. These are just the turbulence of thoughts in the mind. Who is the one who is present? Naked and pure from the very beginning. Naked means it's not covered with anything. Sometimes we do appear to be covered. Say, for example, this morning you got a phone call from a friend who was very sick. The message is quite shocking, and it seems to stay with you. You get a mood. Moods are very interesting because they're not the same as thoughts. They're more pervasive. They're like a mist on the hills, and they seem to continue in time. And because they are as pervasive, they suffuse us. They seem to fill us up. But so say you have a mood of depression or sadness, this sort of vague, semi-opaque coloration which brings a particular quality of experience. How can the mind be naked in relation to that? Well, we have not always been in that mood. Before the telephone call, we didn't feel that sadness. Now we feel the sadness and perhaps the anxiety. It is a consequence. There was a cause, and this is an effect. When we are in it, when we are identified with it, it seems completely real. Somebody says, how are you feeling? You say, oh, I'm really sad. And you'd feel sad. You are sad. What does it mean to be sad? It feels like the limit of my existence. This is what's happening for me. I'm sad. Who is the one who is sad? Part of us has fallen forward, tilted into, merged with the sadness. And it appears to be our definition, our sight, our resting place. It appears to tell us the truth about ourselves. I am sad. Then it goes. Because in childhood, we get told lots of things. People say we talk too much, or we make too much noise, or we're very messy, or we're good because we tidy up and are helpful. So we learn to think about ourselves in terms of definitions. And when we meet people, they say, how are you? And we give an account. We tell them things about ourselves as if talking about was the same as being that thing. So that is to say, we have substituted the dimension of narrative, of storytelling, of evanescent event for simply being present in the moment. Because actually, if somebody asks us, how are you? We can't really say anything. All you can say is, fine. And say, well, yeah, but what's happening? Oh, yeah, yesterday was a bit difficult. Oh, tell me what happened. People want to poke away in, get something solid. Because if you're fine, they have nothing to do. You're fine, I'm fine. There was one of these books that was very popular in the 60s. I'm okay, you're okay. Well, if I'm okay and you're okay, what the hell are we doing? But if you've got a problem, that's much more interesting. There's nothing to say in being open. That is to say, whatever you say will not tell you about the domain of openness. It is inexpressible. It is beyond speech, and indeed it's beyond thought. So, in the Dzogchen tradition, Garab Dorje shows our mind is not a thing. We are not things. We are not fixed entities. Pure from the very beginning, nothing has touched us. Nothing has marked us. Everything in this room can be destroyed. Everything in this room can be cut up or spray painted over or burnt. That's the nature of these phenomena. Even the peace of meditators can be destroyed by this noise. Everything which is in existence is impermanent, because it exists in juxtaposition. Certain factors are placed together, and then when other factors come to bear on them, it shifts. But the mirror itself continues to show reflections. If a mirror is in a quiet room where nothing moves, and it has the same reflection in it all day, it's not disturbed. If you stick it on the outside of your car and it sees many, many things as you drive along, it doesn't get tired. The mirror simply shows what is there. The content of the mirror, the reflections, these are very busy, tumbling together, changing all the time. This is the content of our mind. So the function of the practice is to move from intoxication with, identification with the content of the mind to a state of awareness which reveals what it is that's manifesting. This is the basis of all the Dzogchen practices, to separate the content of the mind from the nature of the mind. And when you see the nature of the mind, the content of the mind is revealed as something different. Because when we don't see our primordial purity, we're having to hang on to everything, as we looked earlier this morning. Attachment becomes very real, and we have to make sense of what's there. When we see the nature of the mind, everything is revealed as the radiance of that mind. This room, the motor cars in the street, the city of London, the whole world, this is the radiance of the mind. At first this is difficult to understand. Through the practice we start to experience the domain of experience, direct experience, as opposed to all the constructs of abstract thought, learning and so on. So the mind is said to be naked. Naked means it's not covered with anything. When you become sad, the one, you, your ordinary self, who wasn't sad before the phone call, is now sad. I have become sad. Sadness is covering me, pervading me. The mirror doesn't become happy or sad. The mirror simply shows what is there. This is very different. It said also that the mind is raw. Raw means it's not been cooked with anything. It hasn't been prepared. It doesn't need any improvement. Nothing needs to be done to it. Since we've been very small, we have been on endless journeys of self-development. Learning to go to the toilet, learning to wipe your own bum, learning to tie your shoelaces, learning to pack your own school bag, learning to do your homework, learning to get through the exams, learning to go for an interview, learning and developing and growing. And that's wonderful. When we look back, we might think, God, I wouldn't like to be 12 again. You know, when you get to be grown up, you have a lot more power in the world. You can take care of yourself better for a while. Till we get a little bit sick, then it's different. But we have this brief moment. This is how our ego identity grows. It goes up, and then if we live long enough, it goes down again. The mind itself isn't like that. Awareness hasn't been developed. That's why we say it's pure from the very beginning. It means forever, infinite time, it doesn't change. It's not made better if you're a good person. It's not made worse if you're a bad person. It doesn't get bigger. It doesn't get smaller. It's not like anything else because it's not a thing. Coming to experience this is very different from experiencing anything else. It is also non-dual. That is to say, it doesn't stand apart from anything. Here I have two things. I have a piece of wood and I have a bowl. Because these are two, they can be very far apart or they can come together. They are not the same, they are different. When you look in the mirror, the reflection is in the mirror. You could say the reflection is inseparable from the mirror. You can't take the reflection out of the mirror, and yet the reflection is not the mirror. Is that right? That's like non-duality. Not two, not one. You can't homogenize it like milk. You can't just mix it all up to some standard issue. The space in this room is filled with us. We are in the space. We don't displace the space. We displace water in a bath. We displace air when we move. But we don't displace space because we are always in space. Our mind is like space. So, the mind is without beginning or end. It has no top or bottom. It has no front and back. It doesn't come from anywhere. It doesn't stay anywhere. And it doesn't go anywhere. Because of that, it is infinite. Because it's infinite, all things are within it. And therefore, everything is possible. So, we can do a little bit of practice to move towards that state. But even that language itself is wrong, because if we say to move towards that state, it is as if then the state is somewhere else. Most Buddhist practices are about a path. We talk about yanas, which means vehicles, which are ways of traveling, and lam, paths, and graded paths, and so on, with the sense, here we are in some place not very good, and over there is some place very good, and if we go from here to there, life will get better. But what I'm just describing is, from the very beginning, our own nature, our own presence is completely pure. It means here and now, in the midst of all our thoughts and confusions, this open space is there. It's never changed. It hasn't been covered up by any of the wrong thoughts in our head. It's not made better by any of the good thoughts in our head. It's separate from these and yet not separate, in the way the reflection is not separate from the mirror and is separate from the mirror. So when we do the practice, we simply relax into presence with this natural state. As many of you know this basic practice. We rest our gaze into the space in front of us, The chin is slightly raised. The gaze is resting about an arm and a half length in front of you. As a way of securing this opening, we can visualize in front of us a letter R. You can use the Tibetan form of it or a capital A, and it's surrounded by a ball of rainbow light. This represents the presence of all the teachers of the lineage, all the teachers right back to Garab Dorje and beyond him to Kuntu Zangpo. You can imagine in your own heart also a letter R, which represents your basic openness. R equals the integration of emptiness or the Dharma Dhatu and awareness or Rigpa. So these two provide the matrix within which all manifestation occurs. We rest our gaze in this R in space, and then we recite the sound of R 3 times, and we rest with that for just a brief moment, and then let this R in front of you dissolve, and just rest into the space. And be with whatever is occurring. We're not going inside ourselves to meditate. We're not staring outside at things. We're observing how our body and this room and the sounds outside arise as the ceaseless flow of manifestation, of energy in the spaciousness of awareness. Don't block thoughts, feelings, sensations. Don't try to keep them out of your mind. Don't hang on to them and try and keep them in your mind. But just as there's a car going by, and it's gone. Same way, thought arises, and it's gone. And awareness is here, and awareness is here. So whenever thoughts arise and seem to link together and become locked into a story, and you get carried off in that, very gently relax into the out breath, and present just with the spaciousness, and inside that all phenomena will manifest as change. Okay? So we do this for a short period of time. So we'll do this practice more in the time we have available to us. And the key thing to observe in the practice, but also outside as we move towards taking a break now for lunch, just observe the impermanence of your thoughts. When you sit in the practice and the thought seems to tell you something real, and you find yourself caught up in it, just observe how it goes. Thoughts are imposters. They claim to be something that they are not. They claim to have a validity and truth that they don't have. They claim to be in charge of the situation and to define the situation, but they don't do that. However, if we believe them, then it seems to be fine. It's like if you're traveling with a bunch of children in the train and you're not careful, the children will enjoy themselves and they will talk, and they will start to talk more and more loudly because they're having a good time. And then you have to say, "Sweetheart, shh, there's other people here. Because children's tendency is to forget the context. They don't know where they are. They're just having a good time. This is what happens in the meditation. We tend to forget where we are. And we go off having a good time in the thoughts. Not only do we forget that we're in this room, but we forget that this room is not separate from the Dharma Dhatu. We are always in the Dharma Dhatu. This spaciousness is always there. It is the ground space in which the drama of our life unfolds. And if we forget the space, we are just caught up in whatever's going on, like children having fun together. But of course, when children have fun together, sooner or later someone starts crying. Okay, let's have a break for lunch. It's 1 o'clock now. If we meet back at 2:30, is that okay? And then we'll go on till, I don't know, 5:30, 6, something like that.